Okay, hi everyone. Okay, so as you can see from this slide, what I'm going to talk about is what we call continual neural computation. Let me spend just a couple of minutes to create a bit of context to describe what are our ideas. Of course, we are in the context of continual learning, and the kind of issues that you have with neural networks when you try to apply them to continual learning are the ones that were described in one of the previous talks. Because what happens is that neural networks, most of the times, if you look at the extraordinary results we are getting everywhere, I would say they're trained in an offline setting, meaning that you have a data set that's given or that you prepare somehow, and you do the training and then you exploit your model. In the case of continual learning, or I like saying learning over time, the data is progressively streamed over time. So you get samples as long as time passes, and the IID assumption might not hold anymore, so the distribution of the data might change over time. So the network must be plastic enough to learn the new information from the new data, the current data, and stable enough to avoid forgetting. You don't want to train from scratch every time. You don't want to store all the data that has been streamed. It doesn't scale. But there are some issues because basically neural networks forget. What can we do? I mean, there are many different approaches with different properties. I'm not going through them at all here. For example, some approaches, they suggest to store just some samples and their labels as well, and to replay them. So at a certain time step, you learn also from data from the past, just some small representative samples. If it's a classification problem, you also have to bring the class labels with you. And there are many other approaches. What I'm going to talk about today is basically, a different perspective, I would say, with respect to most of the papers out there. We're really considering the role of each single neuron in the neural network. And we're basically proposing to replace the classic neuron model with something that is more general. It's a generalization of it, so not something completely different. It's something that is a generalization of it that's specifically designed to favor memorization, isolation, and promote information transfer. So you see in this picture, there is also time and data that is provided over time. So I mean, it's the usual setting of learning over time. Okay, that's the classic neuron in an ordinary neural network. Classic neural network, you have a vector of weights. I'm using this, this purple horizontal bar to represent the vector of weights. And you do the dot product with the input of the neuron to get the output. Okay, forget about the activation function. I mean, it can also be there. I mean, it's not important for the point I want to make. And this is a generic neuron. It can be everywhere, not only in the first layer of the network. It could be in some hidden layers, in the output layer, anywhere. Okay, so that's a very generic picture, the one I'm showing. Now, the problem is that whenever you learn over time, you get some new data and you change the values of the weight vector of each neuron, basically, or of some, depends. But basically, that's where forgetting happens. For all the inputs, you change the weight vector, basically. These are the two questions we try to address here. Can we avoid updating the whole, let's say, neuron for each input, but only make some local changes to it so that it will not forget what happens elsewhere? And can we make the neuron able to learn how to behave, to basically gain this dynamic behavior automatically? So a continual neural unit, it's basically a neural unit that generates its own weights. And the generation process takes place in function of the input of the neuron, not of the whole network, the input of that precise neuron you are considering. Each neuron includes a set of, let's say, weight vectors. We call them memory units. And they are basically selected, a few of them, just a few, are selected and blended to generate the final weight vector you're expected to use, basically. The other memory units, the other weight vectors are left untouched. So, this is a way to try to remember and not destroy what was learned in other areas of the input space of each single neuron. So we're replacing the previous formula with this one, I mean, in which w hat is not a weight vector. W hat there, it's a function that generates the weight vector, in function of the input, x, and in function also of two new players that are this matrix K and M that are basically keys and values in an attention model. In this case, we have keys and values are what we call, as I said earlier, memory units. So weight vector. So M is the matrix that stores the memory vectors, the weight vectors, and K is a matrix used for indexing purposes. So it has the same structure, you know, in terms of what you actually do, but it's more general. This is just a way to visualize what I presented in the previous slide. So the output of this neuron, you know, every neuron of the network is expected to be like that, is outputting something coherently with the previously introduced formulas. There are these learnable keys, learnable memory units. You see there are, you know, this matrix M with that many horizontal bars here. Each bar is a weight vector, basically. These alpha over there are attention scores computed by sparse softmax attention. And of course, a customizable similarity function. And what you get out of this is a weight vector that is generated by blending the memory units in M, so blending a few purple vectors that you see in M, purple rows, to get out with the final weight vector to use. And so you can compute the output of the neuron. This computation of attention is sparse in the sense that we actually can specify, we have to specify this parameter delta that is just an integer that tells how many memory units you want to consider every time. So you get, if delta is 3, when you provide some data, each neuron, or this precise neuron we're considering, is going only to consider 3 rows of that matrix, if delta is 3. And it will not touch, let's say, it will not consider the others at all. So when you learn, the memory units that are not considered will not be updated, and it will preserve the information, basically. It's a way to implement parameter isolation, and the fact that you select delta units with delta greater than 1 means that you're also blending the information from these delta units. So we are promoting also transfer of information among a few subset of the whole units. Now, you know, when you see this model, I mean, when I'm talking also to other people, they generally say, oh, wow, this strongly reminds me about this and this and this. Well, that's perfectly fine. You know, you could say, wow, that's an attention model. Yeah, there is attention over there. I mean, no magic tricks. The main thing is that we are generating not the output data of the neuron that is propagated to the rest of the network by means of attention. Attention is used to generate the weight vector that then is used to make the prediction. This way, basically, we guarantee that continual neural units are a generalization of classic neurons. Just because if you just select a continual neural unit with a single memory unit, you basically go back to the classic neuron model. So this is real generalization. It's like giving more power to a certain neuron. Now, I'm really skipping all the math here, just forget about it. You might say, okay, this model reminds me of kernel methods. You know, and if you're familiar with kernel machines, you know, there is in their dual representation, you have this function that depends on a linear combination of kernel evaluations on different points, different bases. If the kernel is linear, it's basically where we are somehow combining what comes from the basis. In this case, we are computing a linear combination of the memory units. The fact is that the memory units are learned. So it's like having a kernel machine in which the bases of the expansion are learned. They are not, you know, predefined in advance. And also the coefficient vectors, they depend on the input as well. And yeah, let me just go quick on this. I mean, if you think about ensemble methods, in particular sparse mixture of experts, yeah, I mean, each of this unit, in a sense, each neuron is a small sparse mixture of experts, where the attention mechanism is used to select what are the important parts of the neuron to use every time. And then just to conclude about this, also if you think about rectifiers, ReLUs, activation, this model can actually be shown to also, you can implement basically a classic neuron with a ReLU activation using a continual neural unit with two memory units, in which one of them is basically composed of zeros. Or if you're familiar with gated linear units, there are still some analogies, right? I mean, because this attention model is just a way to gate, quotes, the memory units in a way or another. So, I mean, there are many, let's say, ingredients that are definitely shared with what's already out there, but here we are pushing all of them inside a single neuron, having in mind the idea of promoting the memorization skills of the neuron over time. How do we learn with continual neural units? Well, it's really plug and play. I mean, you can just take every kind of neural network, replace the neuron model. That's all you have to do, basically. And that's it. You can learn by gradient descent easily. However, so you can adapt basically keys and memories automatically by gradient descent. In the case of continual learning, that's what we like, we found to be better to have a strategy that is a bit more, let's say, conservative, in which at each time step we get the data and we don't update all the keys, all the memory units, well, the delta keys and delta memory units, but just the winning ones. So the keys with the strongest response, just to say. And this kind of update rule, if you are familiar with, online k-means or whatever, it really pretty much resembles something like that, right? And in practice, it's better than just going down with gradients. Plus, there are many, you see that yellow box over there, there are many criteria that we use to replace keys that are not used over time. I'm not going into this. You should check the paper. There are many details. Let's have a look at a toy experiment to visualize what happens with continual neural units. So we have a stream of data, a neural network with a single layer, just one. It's two-dimensional data. Data belongs to 4 different classes, different colors, different classes. So we are in the context of continual online learning. So one example after the other. It's a stream of examples. After a while, at the beginning, I mean, we get only examples from the blue class, and after a while, I took this snapshot in which many blue examples were already provided, and the network, if you check this picture here, is basically outputting blue everywhere for obvious reasons. Then just let's skip the one on the bottom, at the bottom. Then, the orange points are getting streamed, and the network learns to predict orange everywhere, forgetting about the blue stuff completely. If we keep repeating this over and over, at the end of this procedure, of this stream, we basically have that, you see, it's the background is almost red everywhere. So classic neurons, basically, they forgot. They are basically predicting the last class that was observed. If we check the line, the second line of this picture, this is the same thing after having replaced classic neurons with continual neural units, still one layer. You see the stars here, they are the locations of the keys. They are randomly initialized. Basically, over time, these stars, they learn to move over the modes of this distribution. I mean, it's a toy data set, of course. I mean, if you have something that is more complicated, you will not see this perfect alignment. So you see at the end, basically, we have one or more keys for each mode. And the network is able to make predictions that are local. Because of this way of isolating computations that is introduced by the continual memory units. Okay, I mean, we also made some numerical experiments still on 2D data sets in those settings that are pretty common to the continual learning community, so in problems in which you provide classes in an incremental manner, in which you change the distribution of the data, of the domain data in an incremental manner, or both of them. And we compared with a lot of approaches. Most of them are using replay buffers, so they are storing data over time and class labels and relearning from them. Of course, we are also considering a setting in which we have to validate, to select the best model, in a reasonable manner. In lifelong learning, you cannot wait to reach the end of the stream and then select the best model. I mean, the stream will never end. So we are basically using the first portion of the stream to select the best model, and then we let it go. And continual neural units are way better in all these settings and this very simple 2D data. But also on, let's say, real-world data, we are using MNIST, Cypher10, and non-stationary ImageNet. So still in this continual online setting. So one example after the other is provided to the network, okay, single pass. And we basically have got results that are similar to those that are about methods that are using replays, but we are not using any replays. And the nice thing is that this model of neuron is general. So if you like, you can also use replays with these neurons. Nothing prevents you from doing this. We are not doing this on purpose just to compare, right? And that's a very nice property of this model. We also did some ablation studies just to, to convince ourselves that learning with this winner-take-all strategy by selecting just one of the keys, just one of the memory units, and so on and so forth, was really better than just going down by gradient descent everywhere. And we found that in the different data sets we explored, it helps. But that's pretty intuitive. I mean, it means that we are trying to preserve the most of the model. And moreover, if you just go by gradient descent in an online learning, in a continual learning problem, it might happen that only just a few keys are used and the other ones are never used. While we are actually using some criteria to replace those keys that are not used over time, so that basically we have strategies that can help in learning over time. By the way, this new model of neuron is completely generic. You can use it also in offline learning tasks. I mean, I like to think about this in continual learning, but in principle, you can use it also in offline learning. We tried, and in that case, you can just go down by gradient descent and train it. And in this last experiment, we just try to compare different similarity functions. We have attention, and as usual, you can implement it in very different ways. Of course, the more dimensions you have, we found it to be better to use a scaled dot product or the cosine similarity, while obviously with data with a few dimensions, the RBF similarity is working in a nice manner, but I would say it's a pretty widely known result. Okay, just to conclude, what I just presented is a novel model of neuron. We call it continual neural unit. Continual neural units are memory-equipped neurons that can generate their own weights based on the current input. So they want to gain plasticity, but being still stable enough to try to prevent catastrophic forgetting. Of course, I don't have a magic solution to all the problems. We hope we believe this is a novel research perspective in continual learning, and it's general enough to be applied jointly with so many existing methods. That's it. I mean, this work is actually part of a bigger activity. We call it collectionless AI, because we want to, it's like a way to emphasize the fact that we like to design technologies that are learning over time, perhaps in a lifelong manner, without having to store data and try to reproduce conditions for offline learning. So if you like, just have a look at this website, and you will find also the code for this work, and all the many other information that you might be interested in. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Stefano. Time for questions.
Thank you for your talk. In the slide where you present the 2D toy example.
Yeah, okay.
Here, I asked to myself if I just run an incremental K-mean algorithm on the stream, I may obtain a representative example on the weight and retrain regularly a neural network. Did you compare with this?
I mean, this way of handling the data in these neurons, it's actually, if you like, something that pretty much resembles incrementally clustering the input distribution. Yes, it is. I mean, it's like finding special, I want to say, centroids, just to have an idea, that are used to index the input space. There are two things to say about this. The first one is that this is applied on each neuron of the network, and the input of each neuron is what comes from the layer below, if it's a multi-layer network, not necessarily the input data. In this 2D example, there was just one layer. So of course the input is really the data, but in general, it can be data coming from generated by the previous layers. The second thing is that this is not like having a centroid per class or a prototype per class. No, it's just these prototypes, these keys, are just a way to index the input space. Within the same area of the space, you can make different predictions, not necessarily just one. So I know that sometimes, I've been asked this many times, if you just think about the final layer of a network, it pretty much sounds like we are doing prototype-based learning, one prototype per class or things like that. But it's not like this, it's way more general. We apply this process everywhere in every neuron of the network, and we basically let the neuron decide how to index the input space by means of these special quotes prototypes that are basically keeping a subsample of the original distribution over time.
May I continue? No.
Thanks. It was a very interesting talk, but to me it seems like you really dramatically increase the amount of memory you need for this network, right? So have you thought about maybe something like sharing the keys for all neurons in one layer or something like this too?
Yes, thank you. That's exactly what we are actually doing. The way I presented this is really neuron specific, right? So for each neuron, you have its own keys and its own memory, right? In practice, what you do, for example, is that for each layer, you can share the keys. So you have just one instance of the keys for all the neurons of the layer. Actually, if you do it for the whole network, it's like having a way to select one network or another if you share all the keys. So it's very customizable from this point of view. In practice, we do share the keys for all the neurons of the layer. The other thing to say is that keys, I didn't mention this too much. They are generally way smaller than the input of the neuron. There is this projection that I purposely skipped during my presentation that is fixed. It's just a way to project the input over a lower dimensional space so that keys will be smaller. And if they're smaller, it's less memory usage. Yeah.
Thanks.
Any more questions? If you'd like to come back?
As you say, if you share the keys and the memories for all the neural networks, so that means it's like you have a bank of models.
Yeah, sorry?
It's like if you have a bank of models.
Yeah.
And this is exactly the things that have been done before on online stream mining.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a mixture of experts.
Okay. And what is the sensitivity of the value of key and M?
Say it again, sorry.
What is the sensibility of the value of key and M? Because I think it's a strong parameter to
Yeah, of course, it's a design choice how many memories and keys you want. I can tell you that right now we are trying to make this adaptive so that at the beginning, let's say you start with a network with classic neurons, okay? And over time, you progressively add a new memory unit in each neuron or in some of them. So you progressively expand the capacity of the different neurons over time. We were not doing this in this work at the time of the submission. That's what we're trying to do now. So it's like having neurons capabilities are basically memorization skills are adaptively changed over time. And of course, as you were mentioning, if you think about just having keys shared everywhere, it's just like having a way to select the weights of the whole network. It's just selecting different models, in the extreme case, right? It's like that. As I said, these intuitions are widely known, I would say, mixture of experts, being them sparse or not, or all the other things I mentioned. What we want to push is the idea that if you start thinking from the neuron model, then all these other techniques, they are covered in terms of generality, but you try to work at an abstractional level that is a bit lower than usual. I would say the lowest, right, if you think about the neuron model. And that's basically what we're trying to promote.
Okay, so if any more questions for Stephen, I'm sure we'll be there at the poster. That concludes our session today. Thanks everyone, and thanks for the speakers. So enjoy the rest of the conference.